I want to talk a little bit about what was inferred by both Howard and Jack, and it has to do with government, small government, etc. You heard Jack talk about a lot of things that Donald Trump wants to take us out of. You hear Howard talk about what government is supposed to do, and Jack as well mentioned about government and corporations. Here's the thing: the people, there is a story that's told that regulations are bad. It makes things more inefficient, and it prevents companies from giving you a better price because they have to abide by all these regulations. And it also they also talk about how much more efficient the private sector is. Let me first tell you that it is a categorical lie that the private sector is more efficient. Take that out of your minds altogether. It's not true. There's this magical thing called profit. And profit, in effect, for the totality, profit is really an expense to you, to everybody else. I don't have a problem with profit because you can also, my profit is my wages. The corporate profit is whatever they make in excess of what everything else costs. There's not a problem with profit, but when you look at the totality of things, to us, a corporate profit is an expense to us. That is the reality of how financing works. I am not trying to be anti-profit or anything of that sort. I'm just talking about numbers. Now, when we talk about small government, the idea is the corporate sector doesn't want some entity looking over their shoulders to what they would consider minimize their profits. We don't have anything against profits, but we don't want profits at the expense of your health, at the expense of the environment being destroyed, at the expense of your safety, at the expense of your education. We don't want profits on the backs of people's not well-being, if you will. What do I mean by that? You hear a lot of folks talking about vouchers and private schools, etc. So what do? They ensure that schools are not as good as they could be. Then they accuse the public sector, they accuse government of being poorly managers of schools. And the solution to that is private schools paid by your tax dollars. But here's the thing, and I want you to understand this clearly. If I take public school number one and I take private school number one, first of all, the reality says if you take a look at which one does better, it is a wash. And more often so, the public schools do better than the private schools in the aggregate. Meaning take all private schools, take all public schools, etc. But here is the kicker, folks. That is to be expected. Why? If you have a private school, when they hire teachers, here, let's just use Texas as an example, they don't have to be as accredited as teachers in public schools. They don't get the medical care, the health care that teachers in public schools get. In other words, public schools teachers get a lot of benefits for being teachers, and private school teachers don't get the kinds of benefits they get that these public school teachers get. And again, the public school teachers have to be more accredited than the private school teachers. But then there's another thing. There's something called a profit. And whether it is a non-profit private school or not, the administrators of these private schools and get large salaries. And if it's one that is for profit, they get to pay their shareholders monies, etc., etc., etc. Which means for the private schools, one of the items on their expense lines would be the shareholders getting paid, the executives getting paid, the advertising to get people to come to that school having to be paid. All of that is coming out of the budget to educate. In the public schools, there is no advertising to be done. There are no shareholders holding the value for these schools. And and again, the teachers make more, of course, and they're more accredited. If you look at what we say in capitalism always, is you get what you pay for. That is, if you have better paid teachers in the public sector, do you think you're going to get the same caliber of teachers in the private sector? Of course not. So then why is it that we have bad public schools? Because again, we want to make certain public schools as bad as possible to incentivize the public to support things like vouchers, things like private schools, etc. And I can put this behavior in just about everything that we try to privatize. Transportation. When we talk about having private buses and private trains, etc., within for mobilizing people around the city, it could never be as efficient as having it in the public sector. But what we do is we try to starve the public sector of tax dollars, allow the private sector to come in, and then they get to charge you whatever they want to charge you, because they have to make a profit, because they have to have advertising, because they have to pay their executives, because they have to pay their shareholders. Anytime somebody tell you that the private sector does everything better than the public sector, they're lying to you. They're feeding a narrative so that you will act on that false narrative. We can go to transportation, we can go to education, we can go to all these other features. Now, when we go to regulations, why must we have regulations? It's always easier to dump your waste into a river unfiltered, without first being processed to remove its dangerous particles, etc. If we don't have regulations that say you can't dump things of this nature in your rivers, it is dumped. If you don't have regulations that say you can't pump crap into the ground that later on pollutes the water table, it gets done. Because the capitalists, the private sector, their sole goal is to maximize profits. Am I saying profit is bad? No. I am saying that we have to protect against bad private sector actors. And that is called regulations. And that is also called making sure we take care of humanity first. So again, when we talk about the public sector, there are certain things that should remain in the public sector. That becomes education, which we don't want people profiting off of moving the country's knowledge forward. We should have healthcare. Again, you know what happens in healthcare right now, where they simply rob you dry to keep you healthy. Energy distribution shouldn't be. The oil in the ground wasn't placed there by Exxon or all these guys. We can act if we didn't have to pay shareholders, if we didn't have to pay overpaid executive bonuses, there's a lot more money that would have been there to go into research and development, dropping the price of oil and increasing our transition to energy that doesn't pollute the skies. Doesn't pollute the air, that creates worse hurricanes, that creates worse damage to our planet, which then costs more. So lack of regulations allow them to pollute to make more profit. Their pollution gets us sicker. And then we pay for their overpriced products, and we pay for the sicknesses that they give us. When they tell you that the private sector is more efficient than the public sector, they're lying to you. I just gave you the examples of why that is the case. Am I saying we shouldn't have a private sector? That's not what I'm saying at all. I want my pizza shop to be diverse and have all kinds of different inputs. I want innovation to come from the private sector. Whatever, if I think of something, I've invented several things myself in software. And then eventually I turned some of it over to the public domain. But again, there has to be the proper balance. You have to have the proper balance, and the balance in our country, in our Western worlds right now, is that the capitalist gets everything and the rest are peons. The capitalist gets everything. The ones who know the least but have capital get everything, and you get very little. But what they do, because they control the media and much of education, is they have you confused and they lie to you. And so too many of us buy the Kool-Aid and believe it. Folks, we got to wise up. Thank you, Howard and Jack, for allowing me to create this short soliloquy.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.